Well, if you've learned one thing about me, it's that I love to solve problems, and it's no different. Every area of your life, you're gonna have to solve problems. And in this area, I wanna talk to you about your marriage and family, especially in ministry, because in ministry, it takes on a different dynamic. I mean, every marriage has its pluses, minuses, its challenges, but in ministry, it elevates, it's different. And I want to share some of the things that we had to go through that Becca and I learned to help us make our marriage strong and to figure out how to solve these problems. And I can tell you this, our very first fight was how long did Becca have to stay after church? I was the one that wanted to stay until every single person was gone. Get there early, stay late, talk to everyone, maybe go out to eat with somebody. She was raised in a small church, about 60 people, 2 kids in the youth group. She was like, no more than 5 minutes you give talking to people, small talk, grab a donut, and get out the door. And so here we are, a 5-minute and a 45-minute person. And we're fighting every week after church. We're brand new in ministry, and we're fighting. And I'm like, we've got to solve this problem. And so we tried, what about a 30-minute? What about this? What about that? And we couldn't figure it out. And then we finally said, wait, we own 2 cars. We could drive 2 cars to church and do it that way. You give 15 minutes, you take off, I'll meet you later. Man, marriage saved, problem solved. And I'm gonna tell you right now, be creative. Figure out how to solve problems and to work things out as a couple and be able to say, hey, we're not gonna let this problem derail us. And isn't it crazy? Sometimes it's the smallest things. You say, well, in ministry, is it like spiritual attack? Yes, there's spiritual attack, but that's not what really you're worried about in your marriage. You're worried about, can you solve those little problems so they don't become bigger problems that turn into spiritual attacks? So a couple other things that we did. We had yes, no weekends. Why? Because I say yes to everything. And so after church on the weekend, somebody would say, hey, do you want to go do? And I'd say like, yes, of course I do. And then I'd go check with Becca and I'd say, hey, Becca, they want to go do this or do that. And do you want to go with? And she'd be like, well, remember you promised me you'd do this with me and we were going to go do this date or you were going to fix this or whatever. And I was like, oh, yeah. And then I'd go back to the people and say, yeah, I talked to Becca. We can't. It's not going to work. Sorry. And she's like, wait, that makes me like the worst wife around in ministry. You can't do that. Man up. Man up. Let you just be the leader here and know whether or not you could say yes or no. So we actually did this. We had yes and no weekends on the calendar. And I would know going into the weekend, can I say yes to somebody or am I saying no? And instead of saying, oh, my wife said, man, I was able to say, hey, no, this is a no weekend. I've already promised Becca I would do this. And it helped me to be a better husband. It helped to protect my wife so people didn't think Rob was fun, Becca was the buzzkill. And again, solving the problem. With that same thought, in ministry, I'm not sure where you're at, husband or wife in ministry, but if the other one is working a job, a vocational job, and they're out there in the marketplace, here's my advice to you for those that are in the ministry, outwork your spouse. Husbands, outwork your wife. If she's in the marketplace and you're in the ministry, vice versa. Women, outwork them if they're in the marketplace. Don't let a root of bitterness get in there. It was probably the best advice I had when I started to plant this church. This minister said, hey, you know, when your wife is leaving and going to work in a cubicle and going to be there all day and do all this stuff, hey, you want to make sure that you outwork her and that when she gets up in the morning, you get up in the morning. When she comes home, you're coming up. You're not like, man, I was at Starbucks again today, you know, Frappuccinos were on sale and, you know, just lots of ministry vision thoughts as I was chilling in Starbucks. He was like, no, if you do that, your wife's going to get bitter. You're gonna need to say, hey, I visited these people, I did this, I wrote this, I went there, I talked to these people, signed the lease, did this, and be able to outwork so that there is that ability so that there's not a root of bitterness that comes in. A couple other things that we did. We exchanged our calendar. We'd go to lunch every week and just look at the calendar and say, what's on your calendar? What didn't I tell you about? What do you need to know? And we'd go over the whole 2 months and be able to say, here's what's coming up. And there were less surprises. Less surprises mean happier marriage. Happier marriage means all sorts of great things for your marriage. You want a happy marriage, so less surprises. With that too, just a side note, when we were younger and money was much tighter and we of course had kids, we're trying to figure out how do we do this, we did a babysitting exchange with another couple. Like we watched their 2 kids for one night a week, they watched ours one night a week, and it's so much more fun to go on a date when you're not paying for the babysitter on top of that. So it's kind of a neat little exchange that we did every week. I mean, we did it for a couple of years, and it was 2 to 2. It wasn't like they had 5 kids and we had 2. We'd be getting gypped. We'd have to get 2 nights for that. But so these are other things you have to figure out. Is your home a castle or a conference center? Figure that out. If you want your marriage to run smooth, figure out, is it a castle? Like, does your spouse see that's the place where you pull the drawbridge up and you are a family? Or is it where everyone comes and you have a big celebration? It's party central and everybody goes. Usually it's opposite, okay? And if one of you sees it as a castle, you've got to respect that, because you can't make a castle a conference center. And if that's a refuge place for you, you need it to be a refuge place. Now, speaking of that, we had a refuge within a refuge. Our screen porch was where Becca and I talked about anything that was bad in the church, because we didn't want that to spill over onto our kids. So I'd be like, after dinner, like, we need to step out to the screen porch and have a little conversation. Even in the winter, we'd go ahead and put our winter jackets on, go out to the screen porch and be able to, I didn't want our kids to hear that. Matter of fact, I'd love to dive deep into that and talk about PKs in a little bit, but it was a refuge within a refuge, a castle within a castle, if you will. Another thing that we did, we had to learn how to fight fair. I'm a good arguer. I can talk, and it's what I do. I mean, and I persuade people. And Becca and I would be arguing, and man, I'm trying to win and get the angle and do this. And I just realized, wait a minute, it's not about trying to win. It's about trying to resolve the problem. That was just a breakthrough for me. I'm not trying to win. I'm trying to admit what I'm wrong at. Like, I was wrong. I admit that. I'm sorry. But I was trying to win, and I thought even if I was going to admit that I was wrong, I was going to be 52-48. Like, she's going to take 52% of the blame. I'd take 48, so I'd win. And God was like, don't win. Fix this problem. Help save your marriage. Don't try to win. So that was something we had to do. And then also, I had to watch my volume. Like, I come from a very expressive family. I mean, we're having dinner, and we'd be like, be quiet, and we're practically wrestling at our dinner table. And Becca's family's like, meal is fantastic. Why? It's such praise for me. I mean, it was just so opposite. I mean, you've got this outgoing, combative, talk about politics, religion, versus don't talk, eat in silence and say thank you and please. And so, man, I had to watch my volume, because I'd be like, wait. And she's like, that scares me. You're way too loud. And I remember, this is terrible, but I went, this is not yelling. This is yelling. And she goes, don't ever do that again. You scared me. I was like, okay, all right. You gotta learn to fight fair and to be able to watch the volume. And then another thing is, don't, say, well, I remember when, man, deal with it and move on. Deal with it and move on. Don't hold it for a better argument day. Here's our thing in ministry. You're gonna be working and working and working. And if you wanna have a great marriage in ministry, you have to decide and determine, like, what does it mean to be a workaholic? Okay, the job of the ministry is never done. The calling of this, it's never done. People that are with you could backslide. People that are with you could walk away. The church could be growing one day and shrinking the next day. You understand? It's always changing, and it's never done. And that's why I used to like to paint. I'd like to paint a room or a wall, because when it's done, the wall's not backsliding on me. It's just staying painted. And I thought, that's awesome. It's finished. It's done. And I loved it until my wife cut on, and then she made me paint everything. And so I was like, okay, I no longer like painting. I like the concept of painting, and we can outsource it. And I'll look at that completed wall. But we had to figure out, am I a workaholic? And I asked a mentor, I said, am I a workaholic? And he said, explain that to me. And I said, I'm wondering if I'm a workaholic. He said, well, tell me your schedule. I said, well, and this is my day off. He said, do you take your day off? I said, almost always, like 80% of the time. Okay, good. He goes, do you use up all your vacation? I said, oh yeah, every year, use it up. And he goes, okay, you're not a workaholic, you're a hard worker. You're a hard worker. My dad worked 3 jobs. He was in the military, he counted inventory for a company, and he was a service advisor at Ketterling. I mean, so 3 jobs, that was my world. Her dad was a college professor, Tuesdays and Thursdays, And she's like, that's how you work. That's a job. And I'm like, no, that's a professor. That's not a job. Okay. I mean, I know that's a job, professor, that's a job. It's a different job than working in an auto dealership and working in the military on the weekend and counting inventory on Thursday nights because you're trying to make ends meet. Okay. And so we had to decide, was my drive to achieve my drive that was putting me by my dad, was that normal or was it abnormal? And so using up my days, taking my day off, using up my vacation, said I was a hard worker, not a workaholic. I hope these things help. I'll give you one last tip and we'll close this fun one instead of like workaholic. Walk side by side. What Becca and I have found in our marriage is taking walks together side by side has helped our marriage, because men, for the most part, communicate side by side, shoulder to shoulder. You got a ball game, football game. Hey, how's it going? Love it. Hey, how's things going to work? Good. A little bit of like lean in contact, but not like, tell me about your dreams. Tell me about your passions. How are things going? That's not us, okay? We're like, hey, how's it going? Good. Hey, pass the mustard. Okay. Hey, 2 Cokes here. All right. That's the way we communicate, whether it's any sport. We're more comfortable shoulder to shoulder, and we open up that way. And so Becca and I have walked, and as it helps your heart, first of all, you're walking and you're getting some exercise, and it helps your marriage because you're talking and we're keeping up with each other, and we're back and forth, and it's just so comfortable as a guy to be able to talk to my wife that way. So I hope that helps, and I'm praying that your marriage will be strong, your family will be strong, and ministry will be a blessing to you and not a burden.